Bethany York stood on the station platform one day late. Her nurse's bag split open while two boys laughed at the empty bread tin rolling in the dust. The man who promised her work was gone. The boarding house wanted money, and the town looked at her like lateness was a sin. Henry Underwood leaned against a crutch beside his horse, one sleeve pinned close, where a bullet wound burned beneath his coat. He had come for bandages, not trouble, and not a homeless woman with tired eyes. But when Bethany bent to gather her scattered things, Henry stepped into the laughter and said, "Quiet as a church bell, ma'am. You are right on time. Before we ride into this story, let me know what country you are watching from. Comment your country below, and subscribe if you love emotional cowboy stories about shame, rescue, forgiveness, and second chances." The train had left Bethany York behind, in a cloud of black smoke and prairie grit. She stood where the last passenger car had been, one hand pressed to the frayed collar of her gray traveling dress, the other hovering over the contents of her fallen nurse bag. A roll of bandage had unwound across the boards, like a strip of surrender. A tin cup had rolled under the bench. Her empty bread tin sat in the dust below the platform, dented from the kick one boy had given it after it fell. "Fine nurse," one of the boys called. "Not old enough to shave, but old enough to be cruel. Can't even tend to her own supper." A woman near the freight office pulled her child closer, as if hunger could be catching. Bethany's cheeks burned, but she did not cry. She had learned on 3 hard rows that tears only fed a crowd. She knelt, gathering her bandages one by one, keeping her movements calm even when her stomach cramped. She had eaten half a biscuit before dawn, and that biscuit had belonged to yesterday. "Miss York?" The voice came from the station master, Mr. Dobbs, who stood at the ticket window with a ledger under one arm. He was a square man with a square beard and a mouth that seemed built to say no. "Yes, sir." Bethany rose carefully. "I was told Mr. George Weller would meet me. He wrote that a nurse was needed in Mercy Creek." Dobbs looked past her toward the street, where the late afternoon sun turned every window into a sheet of fire. "Mr. Weller buried his mother 2 days ago and left on the morning train. Said he waited a full day for you." Bethany felt the words strike harder than the wind. "The bridge was out east of Abilene. They held us overnight. That might be," Dobbs said, and his tone made plain that it did not matter. "But he left no funds, no room, and no employment." She swallowed. "There must be another household needing help. I am trained in fever, care, wounds, birthing, and folks here use Dr. Heroine. Dobbs closed his ledger. "And boarding at Mrs. Clegg's is 50 cents in advance." Bethany looked at the dusty street. Horses shifted at the hitch rail. A wagon rattled past with flour sacks stacked high, and a little girl staring at her from between them. The church bell in the distance struck 4, each note plain and cold. "I can work for supper," Bethany said. The station master's eyes softened for half a second, then hardened again as if Mercy had embarrassed him. "Mercy Creek has had trouble with drifters. Best you move along with the next train. I have no ticket." Then I reckon you have a problem." The boys laughed again. Bethany bent for the bread tin, and that was when the shadow fell across it. A man stood between her and the boys. He was tall, though pain had bent him slightly at the shoulder. His hat was low, his jaw dark with travel, and one boot bore dried mud the color of creek clay. A crutch leaned under his left arm, but he held himself like a fence post hammered deep into stone. His right hand rested near his belt, not threatening, just present. "Pick that up," he said. The boys stopped laughing. The older one pointed at himself. "Me? You kicked it. Pick it up." Something in his voice made the station quiet. Not loud, not angry, just certain. The boy climbed down from the platform, snatched the tin from the dust, and set it beside Bethany's bag. "Apologize," the man said. The boy muttered something. Clearer. "Sorry, ma'am." Bethany's throat tightened. "Thank you." The man looked at her then, and she saw the gray of his eyes, the deep lines beside them, and the strain he was trying not to show. Beneath his coat, fresh bandage bulked near his ribs. One sleeve did not hang quite right because his left arm was bound close to his side. "Name's Henry Underwood," he said. "You a nurse? You yes." She lifted her chin, though she knew how she looked. "Dusty, hungry, late. Tanny York, can you stitch a wound clean and keep a fever from taking hold?" "I can. Can you ride in a wagon without fainting?" I crossed 2 states by rail with a woman coughing blood beside me, and a baby born somewhere outside Dodge. "I believe I can manage a wagon." One corner of his mouth moved, barely. "Good." Mr. Dawes stepped closer. "Henry, you don't want to get mixed in this. She just said she came late for Weller." Henry did not take his eyes off Bettany. "I heard. She has no references here. I can ask for those after supper." Bettany stiffened. "Mr. Underwood, I am not asking for charity. I did not offer it." The answer was so plain that she did not know how to receive it. Henry shifted on his crutch and drew a breath that cost him. "I have a ranch 7 miles north. I have a wound that keeps opening because I am a fool who will not stay seated. I have a boy in my kitchen with a cough that turns mean at nights. I came for bandages and quinine, but if a trained nurse came one day late to town, that sounds early enough for me." The station master frowned. "People will talk." Henry looked at him at last. "People in this town talk when rain falls crooked." A few men near the hitch rail chuckled, then stopped when Dobbs glared. Bettany looked down at her nurse's bag. The leather was cracked. Her last coin lay sewn into the hem of her petticoat, kept there for burial or bread, whichever came first. Pride rose in her like a wall, but behind it stood hunger, cold, and the empty miles she had already walked. "What would the work pay?" she asked. Henry seemed to respect the question. "Room, board. $1 a week if you stay through the month. More if the herd sells well. That is low for trained nursing, I know." "Then why say it without shame?" "Because it is all I can pay without lying." That stopped her more than any generous promise could have. The wind lifted dust around their boots. A train whistle cried somewhere far down the line, fading toward land that had no use for her. Bettany gathered her bandage roll, her tin cup, and the empty bread box. Henry bent as if to help, winced, and failed to hide it. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Your bandage is too tight in the wrong place." He looked at her hand hovering near his coat. "Is it?" "Yes, you are favoring your breath." "I favor breathing in general." Despite herself, Bettany almost smiled. Then Mrs. Clegg, the boarding house widow, appeared at the edge of the platform with her arms crossed. "Henry Underwood, if you carry that woman to your ranch, do not bring the scandal back to my supper table." Henry's face closed like a door. "I have not eaten at your supper table since you charged my sister for soup the day after her husband died." Mrs. Clegg went red. Bettany heard the words, and with them, something hidden, a sister, a death, a man who remembered every small cruelty. Henry turned back to her. "My wagon is at Bell's store. I move slow. You can still say no before I reach it." Bettany glanced once at the station, at Mr. Dobbs, at the boys now silent, at the empty track stretching east and west like 2 directions of refusal. Then she picked up her bag. "I will come for 1 week," she said, "and I will keep account of my wages." Henry nodded. "Fair." He started down the platform steps, his crutch striking wood with a hollow sound. Bettany followed, carrying everything she owned. Behind them, someone whispered. Someone else laughed, low. But Henry did not turn, and after a moment, neither did she. Henry Underwood's first act of kindness was so stiff and awkward that Bettany nearly mistook it for insult. At Bell's Mercantile, he bought flour, coffee, salt pork, a sack of apples bruised too badly for regular sale, and 3 rolls of clean bandage. When Bettany stood near the door, he added a paper packet of crackers to the counter. "For the road," he said. "I told you I am not taking charity." He slid the packet toward her without looking. Then consider it an advance on a week's wages, on keeping me alive long enough to pay them. Dr. Hiram Bell, who owned both the mercantile and a small surgery in the back, watched them over his spectacles. He was a narrow man, neat as a folded receipt, with fingers stained by iodine. Henry, if you needed care, you might have asked me. I did. You asked for bandage. That is the part of your care I trust. Dr. Bell's eyes cooled. And you trust a woman who arrived with no employer and no roof? Bethany felt the old shame circle her like a dog. I have training certificates in my bag. Paper travels easier than character. Henry's hand landed on the counter. Not hard but final. Careful. The doctor lifted both palms. I only mean Mercy Creek has its standards. Henry gave a dry look around the store, where a jar of penny candy sat beside a rifle display, and 3 men pretended not to listen. Mercy Creek highs its standards well. Bethany should have felt defended. Instead, she felt exposed. A defense made people wonder what had needed defending. She could almost hear the story forming already. Homeless nurse taken in by wounded rancher, paid in crackers and rumor. Outside, Henry tried to lift the flour sack one-handed. Bethany set down her bag and reached for it first. You will open your wound, she said. I have hauled heavier. With 2 working arms and less blood missing, I imagine. He stared at her. Then he let go. It was a small surrender, but not an easy one. She loaded the flour into the wagon, then the coffee and apples. The horse, a patient bay with a white blaze, turned its head to inspect her. That is Moses, Henry said. He bites men who brag and women who wear too much perfume. I have neither perfume nor bragging rights. Then why get along? The wagon ride north began under a sky, the color of heated brass. Mercy Creek slipped behind them in a scatter of roofs, the church steeple, the water tower, and the telegraph poles marching beside the rail line. Betty sat on the bench with her bag at her feet and the crackers unopened in her lap. Henry drove with his right hand. Every rut shook pain through him. He made no sound, but she saw the whiteness at the corner of his mouth. Stop the wagon, she said after a mile. He did not. Why? Because I need to fix that bandage. It will hold. It is not holding. It is strangling. There is a difference. He flicked the reins. Moses slowed, but did not stop. Mr. Underwood, Bethany said, using the voice that had once made feverish miners obey. I feel faint and fall from this wagon. I cannot carry you. Then both of us will be stranded, and I will be forced to tell Mercy Creek you were defeated by clean linen. That got the wagon stopped. Henry looked at her for a long moment. You talk sharp for a woman who looked ready to blow away at the station. And you take correction poorly for a man leaking through his shirt. He glanced down. A faint red mark had appeared beneath the edge of his coat. Fine, he said. Bethany climbed down, took her bag, and stood beside the wagon. Coat off, his expression changed. She understood then. It was not modesty. It was grief or humiliation or the hard pride of a man whose body had betrayed him in public. His left arm trembled as he tried to ease the coat back. Let me, she said softly. He did not answer, but he stopped fighting the sleeve. She helped him remove the coat and saw the wound. A bullet had entered high near the ribs and torn out raggedly. Whoever dressed it had used too much pressure over swelling and too little padding where the cloth rubbed raw. The skin around it was angry, but not yet poisoned. This was not cleaned properly, she said. It was cleaned by a cattleman with whiskey and a clean shirt. That cattleman was brave and foolish. He was me. Then I stand by my judgment. Henry looked away toward the prairie, where grass rolls silver under the wind. Bethany washed her hands with water from his canteen, cleaned the wound as best she could, and rewrapped it with fresh linen. He stood through it without complaint, but sweat ran down his neck. How did it happen? She asked. Fence cutters, Rustlers, men hired by a neighbor who wants my water. She tied the bandage firm but kind. And you were shot defending a creek. I was shot defending the idea that a man should not have to ask permission to water his own cattle. When she finished, he breathed easier despite himself. There, she said, now you may go on pretending you are made of fence wire. He picked up his coat, but instead of putting it on, he held it out to her. She frowned. What is that for? You are shaking. I am not. You are. Either from hunger or cold or rage. Might be all three. I have my shawl. Your shawl is thin enough to strain tea. The coat hung between them, heavy, worn, smelling of horse, smoke, and sun. Taking it felt dangerous, not because Henry threatened her, but because warmth could undo a person faster than cruelty. Cruelty confirmed what the world was. Warmth asked her to believe in something better. I will return it at the ranch, she said. I reckon it knows its way home. She put it around her shoulders. It swallowed her arms and held the heat of him. She turned quickly toward the wagon, so he would not see her eyes. As they rode on, clouds gathered over the northern hills. Henry offered no grand speech. He did not ask why she had arrived late, why she had no trunk, why a trained nurse carried everything she owned in one cracked bag. He only drove through the lowering light, jaws set against pain, while the prairie wind pushed at them like a warning. Near sunset, the Underwood Ranch appeared in a shallow valley, a weathered house with a stone chimney, a barn leaning but proud, a windmill creaking beside the well, and corrals patched with mismatched rails. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. A dog barked once, then twice. A small boy stood on the porch wrapped in a quilt, his face pale beneath a mop of brown hair. Beside him, an older woman waved a dish towel, as if scolding the whole horizon. Henry's grip tightened on the reins. That is my nephew, Caleb, he said. He is 8. He has been coughing blood spots into his handkerchief and hiding them from Mrs. Finch because he thinks I have enough troubles. Bethany looked at the boy, at the house, at the man beside her who had called her right on time, though he had every reason to fear lateness. The wagon rolled into the yard. Caleb coughed into his quilt. Bethany stepped down before Henry could help her. Take me to him. The Underwood kitchen was warm in a way that hurt. After weeks of train smoke, coldy pots, charity benches, and thin coffee, Bethany had almost forgotten the smell of a real hearth. Beans simmered in a black pot. Cornbread cooled on a cloth near the stove. A lantern burned on the table, throwing gold across the scrubbed boards and the blue-chipped plates. Rain began tapping at the windows just as Bethany entered. Soft at first, then steadier, like fingers asking permission. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, was a broad woman with silver hair pinned hard enough to survive a tornado. She took one look at Bethany in Henry's oversized coat and narrowed her eyes. So, this is what he brought back instead of resting. This is Miss Bethany York, Henry said. She is a nurse? Mrs. Finch gave Bethany a measuring look. Are you now? Yes, ma'am. Can you make a child swallow bitter medicine without turning the whole house into a battlefield? Usually, can you keep Henry Underwood from standing when he ought to sit? Bethany glanced at Henry. I make no claim to miracles. Mrs. Finch's stern mouth twitched. That twitch became Bethany's first welcome. Caleb sat by the stove, trying to look annoyed by the attention. His cough was deep but not yet settled beyond hope. Bethany knelt before him, warmed her hands, and asked his permission before touching his throat. Uncle Henry says nurses poke. Caleb said, only when required. Do you have a needle? I have several. Are they big? Enormous, she said gravely. But they are sleeping in my bag, and we shall not wake them unless you force me. Caleb studied her. You talk funny. I am hungry. It affects my charm. To Bethany's surprise, the boy smiled. She dosed him with a small measure of quinine-honeyed water and steam from a kettle tented under a towel. She listened to his chest, checked his tongue, and made Mrs. Finch open the windows for a moment despite the rain, explaining that stale heat could worsen the cough. Caleb objected to every step, but he obeyed. When he saw Henry leaning in the doorway, pale and stubborn, the boy sat straighter. "You got shot again?" Caleb asked. "Only the same once," Henry said. Miss York fixed his bandage. Mrs. Finch said, setting bowls on the table. "My bay now. He will stop bleeding on my clean shirts." Bethany looked at the food and felt ashamed of how badly she wanted it. Henry noticed. Of course he noticed. Men who lived by watching weather and cattle noticed everything. Mrs. Finch put a bowl in front of Bethany. "Eat before you fall into my beans." Bethany folded her hands in her lap. "I should see to Mr. Underwood's wound once more after supper." "You will eat first," Henry said. It was not tender. It was almost an order. Yet the plate was full, and no one laughed at the way her hands shook when she lifted the spoon. That first meal changed something. Not much. Not enough to call trust, but enough to make Bethany feel the floor beneath her feet. In the days that followed, life at the ranch found a rhythm. Morning came with rooster calls, coffee, and the squeal of the windmill. Bethany checked Caleb's breathing before the boy was allowed to do chores. She changed Henry's bandage after breakfast and again at night, ignoring his complaints and praising him only when he deserved it, which was not often. Mrs. Finch taught her where the linens were kept, which floorboard near the pantry groaned, and which hens were too mean to turn your back on. Henry tried to pay her respect by staying distant. He spoke plainly, thanked her for her work, and never crossed into the small room Mrs. Finch gave her at the back of the house. Yet his distance carried its own kind of misunderstanding. Some evenings, after Caleb slept, Bethany would sit at the kitchen table, mending torn cuffs, while Henry studied ranch accounts with a pencil clenched too hard in his hand. He did not ask about her past. She did not ask about the empty woman's shawl hanging on the peg by the door, though she saw how Caleb touched it when he thought no one watched. One cold morning, Bethany found Henry in the barn, trying to saddle Moses with one working arm. "You are determined to undo my work," she said. He looked guilty, which on his face appeared as irritation. "Cattle broke through the east fence. Send one of the hands. I let them go last month. Could not pay them through winter." That was when Bethany began to understand the Underwood ranch was not merely worn. It was endangered. The roof needed patching. The hay was low. Henry counted coffee scoops like coins. The wound had trapped him at the worst possible season, and pride had kept him from admitting it. "Then I will help," she said. "You are not fixing fence, no dar. I am making a list. A list will not hold cattle. Neither will a dead rancher." She found spare wire in the shed, sorted nails, measured clean cloth for bandages, and traded 2 jars of Mrs. Finch's peach preserves in town for camphor and soap dye. At Bell's Mercantile, women stopped talking when she entered. Dr. Bell asked after Henry with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Still playing nurse at the Underwood place?" he asked. "I am working there. A woman alone on a ranch must be careful what name she earns." Bethany met his eyes. "A town doctor should be careful what wounds he neglects." The store went silent. When she returned, Henry heard about it before she reached the porch. Mercy Creek carry gossip faster than the telegraph. "You should not provoke Bell," he said. "He provoked me first. He has influence. So does infection, if ignored. I oppose both." Henry looked at her across the yard. The prairie wind tugged loose strands from her pinned hair. For the first time since she had known him, he laughed. It was a low sound, rusty from disuse, but real. Caleb began following Bethany everywhere. He brought her eggs in his hat, asked whether frogs had bones, and once left a wooden horse outside her door, because, as he explained, "You came with nothing pretty." She set it on her windowsill. That night, she cried for the first time, but quietly, into the quilt, where no one would have to answer for being kind. On Sunday, Henry insisted they all attend church. Bethany wore her gray dress, brushed clean, and Mrs. Finch's bare bonnet. As they approached the whitewashed church, conversation dimmed. Mrs. Clegg looked Bettany up and down. Mr. Dobbs cleared his throat. Dr. Bell stood near the steps speaking with a stranger. Bettany did not know. Inside, Caleb slid his small hand into hers. It was such a simple trust, so public and unashamed, that Bettany could hardly breathe. Henry saw it. His expression changed, softened, then went guarded again. During the final hymn, rain struck the roof and thunder rolled over the prairie. The congregation sang louder, voices rising against the weather. Bettany felt Henry standing beside her, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. He did not touch her hand. He did not say anything sweet. But when Mrs. Clegg whispered to another woman that some women found shelter by any means they could, Henry turned his head. "Mrs. Clegg," he said, not loudly, "Miss York saved my nephew from fever and my wound from rot. If you must speak of shelter, speak of the kind she gives." The hymn faltered around them. Bettany stared at the hymnal until the notes blurred. After church, Henry offered her his arm in front of everyone. It was a formal gesture, old-fashioned and restrained. It asked nothing improper and declared everything necessary. Bettany placed her hand lightly on his sleeve. For the first time in Mercy Creek, no one laughed. The past arrived in Mercy Creek on a noon train, under a hard blue sky. Bettany heard the whistle while she was hanging sheets behind the Underwood house. Caleb was in the yard teaching the dog to sit, though the dog had been sitting for years and saw no reason to make a performance of it. Henry was at the corral, arguing with a broken gate and pretending he was not winded. By supper, the past had a name: Silas Marrow. Mrs. Finch brought it from town with sugar, lamp oil, and a face like storm clouds. She set the parcels on the kitchen table and looked at Bettany with pity so sudden and sharp that Bettany gripped the chair back. "Say it," Bettany whispered. Mrs. Finch glanced toward Caleb, who was asleep in the next room. "A man came asking after you. Says he knew you from St. Agnes Hospital in Tarpea." Henry stood very still. Bettany felt the room tilt. "What did he say? That you were dismissed? That a fever patient died under your watch? That you fled before questions could be asked?" The words were not new. That was the cruelest part. They were old words, worn smooth from being carried town to town, yet they still cut. Henry's face had gone unreadable. "Is it true?" Bettany looked at him. She could have given the short answer, no. She could have shouted it, thrown it like a pan against the wall. But exhaustion took the strength from her. "A patient died," she said. "A little girl named Anna Merrick." Mrs. Finch sank slowly into a chair. Henry's jaw tightened. "Under your watch?" "Yes." The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with every fear Henry had never spoken. Bettany forced herself on. Her father brought her in with scarlet fever. Dr. Marrow ordered laudanum to quiet her. "Too much," I argued. "He told me nurses obeyed physicians." "I stayed with her all night. She died before dawn." "And you were dismissed?" Henry asked. He wrote a complaint. I had records, dosage notes, times. He said I altered them to cover neglect. The hospital board believed him because he had a fine coat, a wife who hosted charity teas, and friends with money. I had ink on my fingers and no family name worth defending. Henry looked toward the dark window. "Why run?" "Because Dr. Marrow told every hospital between Topeka and Denver that I killed a child. Then he told me if I kept speaking, he would see me jailed. I took work where I could. Fever camps, rail crews, birthing rooms, places desperate enough not to ask too much." Mrs. Finch's eyes shone. "Child." Bettany, step back from the kindness. "Do not pity me." Henry turned then, and what she saw in him was not anger at her. It was something worse, a wound opening. "My sister, Ruth, died waiting on a nurse," he said. Bettany did not move. Henry's voice was low. "Caleb's mother. Fever took her after childbirth. Doctor said a nurse was coming from Fort Laramie. She arrived a day late. Ruth asked for water. then for Caleb, then for our mother, who had been dead 10 years. By the time help came, Ruth was cold. Bethany understood at once why he had looked at her the way he had on the station platform. Why the words, "one day late," had not turned him away, though they could have. Why he had said right on time like a man arguing with God. "I am sorry," she said. Henry nodded, but he did not look at her. The kitchen warmth vanished. Rain began again, striking the roof hard. Caleb coughed in his sleep. "I should leave," Bethany said. Mrs. Finch stood. "You will do no such thing." If Silas Marrow is here, he will not stop. He will poison this house next. He will make Mr. Underwood's name part of my—" Henry turned sharply. "You think I fear gossip? I think you fear losing Caleb. I think you fear trusting the wrong person. And I think every time you look at me now, you will see a nurse arriving late to your sister's bed." That struck him. She saw it. He said nothing. Bethany gave a small nod because silence was answer enough. She packed before dawn. Her belongings still fit in the cracked nurse's bag. The wooden horse Caleb had carved sat on her windowsill, and she held it for a long moment before setting it back. It belonged to Kindness, and Kindness belonged to the house she was leaving. She made it as far as the barn before Henry found her. He stood in the doorway, coat thrown over his shirt, hair uncombed, face gray with pain and sleeplessness. "Were you going to walk 7 miles? I have walked farther." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I can afford." He stepped closer. "Tanny." It was the first time he had said her name without Miss York attached. The sound nearly broke her. "I should have answered you last night," he said. "Yes, I did not know how." That is often true of men who wound others by silence. He accepted it with a flinch. "I believed you." She looked up. "I did," he said. "But part of me was standing in Ruth's sick room again, and I hated that part more than I hated anything. It was not fair to you." "No, I am sorry." The apology was rough, plain, not polished enough to be false. Bethany's hand tightened around the bag handle. "Silas Marrow will not allow me peace. Then we will deny him company. You do not know his reach." Henry's gaze moved past her to the eastern hills. "I know men like him. They count on decent folks being too tired, too ashamed, or too afraid to stand in daylight. A barn cat slipped between hay bales. Moses stamped in his stall. The ranch waited around them, shabby and alive. Before Bethany could answer, a shout came from the yard. "Uncle Henry!" Caleb ran through the rain in his nightshirt and boots, coughing, crying, furious. He threw himself at Bethany's waist. "You cannot go," he said into her dress. "You promised to show me how to make willow tea taste less like mud." Bethany closed her eyes. Henry crouched with difficulty beside the boy. "Caleb, Miss York has a choice." Caleb looked at him with betrayal. "Then choose for her." "No," Henry said softly. "That is not how we keep people." Bethany looked from the child to the man. In that moment, she saw the cost of staying and the cost of leaving. One cost threatened her name. The other threatened the small green shoot of hope she had not meant to grow. She knelt and wiped rain from Caleb's face. "I will stay today." The boy grabbed her hand. "Tomorrow too. One day at a time," she whispered. Henry met her eyes over Caleb's head. "One day at a time," he said. Silas Marrow made his move on a Saturday, because Saturday was market day and Mercy Creek would give him the largest audience. Bethany had gone to town with Mrs. Finch for molasses and thread. Henry followed later with Caleb, bringing 2 saddle blankets to sell and a list of parts needed for the windmill. The air smelled of dust, apples, horse sweat, and rain still hiding somewhere beyond the hills. Wagons lined the street. Children chased one another near the church steps. Men gathered outside Bell's Mercantile, talking cattle prices and pretending not to watch Bethany. Silas Marrow stood on the boardwalk, in a black coat too fine for the town, a gold watch chain bright against his vest. He had a handsome face if one did not look at the eyes. Those were flat and pale like creek ice. "Miss York," he called. Bettany stopped. Mrs. Finch muttered, "Keep walking." But Silas had pitched his voice for the crowd. "I am relieved to find you. The hospital board has long desired an accounting." Dr. Bell stood in the mercantile doorway, smiling thinly. Mr. Dobbs came out of the station office. Mrs. Clegg paused with a basket on her arm. Bettany felt every stare. "I gave my accounting," she said. "You burned it." Silas laughed gently, sadly, as if she were a confused patient. "You see, this is the nature of her trouble. Wild accusations, altered notes. A child dead after medicine was withheld." Bettany's hands went cold. "That is a lie," Mrs. Finch snapped. Silas bowed slightly. "Madam, I admire loyalty, but facts do not bend for sentiment." Henry's wagon rolled to a stop at the edge of the street. Caleb sat beside him. Bettany saw Henry take in the crowd. Silas, her face. He climbed down slowly, every movement measured. His wound was better, but not healed. Pain still lived in the set of his shoulders. Silas turned toward him. "Mr. Underwood, I believe I came partly for your sake. You have taken into your home a woman under a serious cloud." Henry said nothing yet. Silas continued, enjoying the silence. "I am prepared to escort Miss York back east quietly. That would spare this town embarrassment." Bettany's breath caught. Back east meant Marrow's control. His friends, his board, his version of truth. "No," she said. Silas smiled, did not move. "You are in no position to refuse." Henry stepped on to the boardwalk. She refused. The crowd shifted. Silas looked him over, lingering on the crutch Henry still used on bad days. A wounded cattleman's gallantry is touching. But this is a legal matter. "Show the warrant." Silas blinked. "The warrant? Even take her show paper." Dr. Bell cleared his throat. "Henry, no need to make a spectacle." Henry looked around. "Seems a spectacle was arranged before I arrived." A few men lowered their eyes. Silas' voice sharpened. "Miss York is responsible for the death of Anna Merrick." Bettany swayed but stayed standing. Henry turned to her. "In front of the whole town," he asked, "do you have proof otherwise?" She nearly laughed from the pain of it. "I had notes. I copied them once, but the copy was stolen from my trunk in Ellsworth." "Not all of it," said a small voice. Everyone turned. Caleb stood in the wagon, pale but determined, holding Bettany's cracked nurse's bag. "I was not snooping," he said, which convinced no one. "I was looking for the willow bark paper. Miss Bettany hides important things in the lining because she thinks thieves do not know sewing." Bettany stared at him. "Caleb." He pulled at a loose seam in the bag and drew out a folded oilcloth packet. Bettany covered her mouth. She had forgotten. In hunger, fear, and years of moving, she had forgotten the emergency copy sewn into the lining by Sister Margaret, an old nun who had once whispered, "Truth needs more than one hiding place." Henry took the packet but did not open it. He handed it to Reverend Pike, the one man in Mercy Creek most folks trusted to read fairly. "Allah," Henry said. Silas lunged. "Private medical notes cannot be." Henry caught his wrist with his good hand. The motion cost him. His face went white, but he did not let go. Reverend Pike opened the packet. Pages unfolded, ink faded but legible. Dosage times, temperature notes, Bettany's objection written in a steady hand. Dr. Silas Marrow's order for laudanum, repeated despite warning. Anna Merrick's decline marked hour by hour. The Reverend's voice shook as he read. The crowd changed as truth entered it, not all at once. Shame seldom arrives in a thunderclap. It moved from face to face, lowering eyes, tightening mouths, making room for what should have been believed sooner. Silas tried to step back. Henry released his wrist. "Going somewhere. This proves nothing," Silas spat. "It proves she told the truth," Reverend Pike said. Dr. Bell had gone pale. "I knew nothing of this." Bettany looked at him. "You knew enough to repeat him." Mrs. Clegg shifted her basket. Mr. Dobbs removed his hat. Then the church bell rang wildly. A horse came tearing down the street, lathered and riderless. Behind it, from the west, a column of smoke rose near the rail bend. Men shouted. Someone cried that a freight wagon had overturned by the crossing, that 2 children were hurt, that one man was pinned. For one stunned second, accusation gave way to emergency. Bethany moved first. "Clean cloth," she said. "Boiled water. Whiskey for instruments, not drinking. Mrs. Finch, get my bag. Reverend, open the church. Henry, do not argue with me. Caleb, stay with Mrs. Clegg. I can help," Caleb protested. "You can help by obeying." He obeyed. So did the town. They carried the injured into the church because it had the widest doors and cleanest benches. Bethany tied her sleeves, washed her hands, and became what she had always been beneath rumor, a nurse. She set a boy's broken arm with 2 men holding him steady. She stitched a teamster's scalp while he prayed. She stopped bleeding from a young mother's leg with pressure and calm words. Dr. Bell offered help, and Bethany gave him tasks without bitterness because patience mattered more than pride. Silas Marrow stood useless near the door until Henry blocked him. "You wanted an accounting," Henry said. "Stay and watch one." All afternoon, Bethany worked. When her knees trembled, Henry brought coffee. When someone questioned her order, Henry repeated it. When blood spotted her apron, Mrs. Clegg rinsed cloth and whispered, "I am sorry." So low Bethany almost missed it. Near dusk, the last patient slept. Rain began, washing the street clean. Bethany stepped outside the church, dizzy with exhaustion. The town waited. Henry came to stand beside her. He had bled through his shirt again from helping lift the pinned man, and Bethany wanted to scold him, but his face stopped her. It held fear, tenderness, and a decision made past all retreat. He took off his hat. "Mercy Creek," he said, voice carrying through the rain. "You saw what kind of woman Bethany York is. Some of us saw it too late. I was almost one of them. She came to this town hungry, tired, and one day late for a job that vanished. I said she was right on time because I needed a nurse. That was true, but it was not all." Bethany stared at him. Henry looked at her then. "She came right on time to teach my house how to breathe again. She came right on time for a boy who needed trusting. She came right on time for a man who had mistaken grief for judgment." His voice roughened. "I will not speak for her future. It belongs to her, but I will speak for my own. If Bethany York will have my name beside hers, whether as employer, friend, or husband, when she is ready, I will count it an honor before God and this town." No one moved. Bethany felt every sacrifice in the words. He had not trapped her with a proposal. He had given her protection without possession. He had made a vow and left the door open. Silas Marrow tried to slip away. Mr. Dobbs caught him by the arm. "Train does not leave till morning." Reverend Pike stepped forward. "And before it does, you and I will write to that hospital board." Mrs. Clegg began to cry into her handkerchief. Bethany turned to Henry. Rain ran from the brim of his hat. His bandage was surely ruined. His pride had been laid bare in front of every person who had mocked them. She placed her hand in his. "I am not ready to answer all of that," she said softly. "I know, but I will stay tomorrow." His eyes warmed. "One day at a time, one day at a time." Truth did not fix everything by sunrise, but it changed the shape of the road. Silas Marrow left Mercy Creek. 2 mornings later, under the watch of Reverend Pike, Mr. Dobbs, and 2 cattlemen who had daughters of their own, he carried letters addressed to the hospital board, the county judge, and Anna Merrick's father. Dr. Bell signed one statement, admitting he had repeated accusations without evidence. It cost him pride and perhaps patience. But Bethany accepted the apology because she had seen enough sickness to know poison must be drawn before healing could start. Mrs. Clegg came to the Underwood Ranch the following week with a covered basket and a face full of discomfort. Bethany met her on the porch. "I made chicken pie. Mrs. Clegg said. That is generous. It is apology pie. I did not know that was a kind. It is today. Bethany let her in. The apology was clumsy, but it was real. Mrs. Clegg admitted she had judged Bethany because fear made easy company and gossip asked less work than truth. Bethany listened. She did not pretend the words had not hurt. She did not offer cheap forgiveness. But when Caleb asked if apology pie tasted better than regular pie, Bethany said they would have to test it fairly, and Mrs. Clegg laughed with tears in her eyes. Winter leaned close, but the ranch endured. Henry sold 3 cattle, not the whole herd, and hired back one hand for fence work. The windmill turned after. Bethany Super found a cheaper part through a rail worker she had once treated. Mrs. Finch declared Bethany better than any almanac, because she could smell weather in Henry's bones before he admitted pain. Caleb's cough eased. He gained color, mischief, and a habit of leaving carved animals in places where Bethany would find them. A rabbit by the wash basin, a bird beside her lamp, a crooked cow on the kitchen shelf. Henry healed more slowly. Bethany changed his bandages until the wound closed, then made him exercise the stiff arm with a patience that bordered on tyranny. He complained. She ignored him. He tried to skip the exercises. Caleb reported him. Mrs. Finch threatened to feed him only turnips. By December, Henry could lift a saddle again, though Bethany still watched him with narrowed eyes when he reached too high. Their affection grew in the quiet spaces. It grew when Henry left the last apple for Bethany and pretended he disliked apples. It grew when Bethany patched his old coat and found, in the inner pocket, a small photograph of his sister Ruth holding baby Caleb. She returned it without questions, and the next evening Henry told her the whole story by lantern light, not because grief had vanished, but because it no longer needed to live alone. It grew when Caleb had a nightmare and called for both of them. Bethany reached his room first. Henry came after, limping, hair wild, revolver in hand, because fear did not stop to dress properly. Caleb clung to Bethany with one hand and Henry with the other. I dreamed everybody left, the boy whispered. Henry sat on the edge of the bed. Not everybody. Bethany brushed Caleb's hair back. Not tonight. Caleb looked between them. Promise. Henry did not answer lightly. Bethany loved that about him. He knew promises were not ribbons to tie around fear. They were work. I promise to stay as long as I am wanted and treated fair, Bethany said. Caleb frowned. That means forever if I behave. It means you should behave and test your theory. Henry laughed, and the sound filled the room like firelight. On Christmas Eve, Mercy Creek held a service with candles in every window. Snow had not fallen, but frost shone silver on the rails. Bethany wore a blue wool dress Mrs. Finch had altered from one of Ruth's old gowns after asking permission from both Henry and Caleb. Caleb said his mother would not mind because pretty should not sit in trunks. At church, no one fell silent when Bethany entered. Mrs. Clegg waved her toward a pew. Mr. Dobbs tipped his hat. Dr. Bell nodded with humility rather than pride. The town had not become perfect. No town ever did. But it had learned, at least once, to blush. After the hymn, Reverend Pike read a letter from Anna Merrick's father. The man had received the copied notes and written that he believed Bethany York had tried to save his child. He had spent years hating the wrong name, and he asked forgiveness if forgiveness could ever cross such a distance. Bethany sat very still. Henry's hand rested beside hers on the pew, not taking, waiting. She placed her fingers over his. That evening, under a sky bright with stars, and a moon thin as a silver shaving, Henry walked Bethany back from the barn. After checking a mare near foaling, lantern lights swung between them. The prairie lay quiet, the kind of quiet that was not empty, but listening. At the porch steps, Henry stopped. Bethany, he said. She turned. Yes, have been trying to find fine words. That sounds unlike you. It has been painful. I suspect it. He smiled, then grew serious. I will not ask because the town expects it. I will not ask because Caleb loves you, though he does. I will not ask because I need a nurse, because I hope you know by now that you are more than what you can do for the wounded. Bettany's throat tightened. Henry removed his hat. I am asking because when you are in this house, I want to come home to it. Because you tell the truth even when it costs you. Because you looked at my grief and did not run from it, except that one morning in the barn. And even then you had good cause. She laughed through sudden tears. I love you, he said simply, not fast, not careless. I love you the way a man learns weather, by watching every morning and trusting what proves steady. If you are willing, I would like to marry you. If you are not ready, I will still drive you to town when you wish, pay your wages honest, and defend your name whether it is mine or not. Bettany looked past him through the kitchen window. Mrs. Finch was pretending not to watch. Caleb was openly watching, nose pressed to the glass. The dog sat beside him, equally invested. For so long, Bettany had believed safety meant keeping her back. A door could close, a job could vanish, a name could be broken by a man with cleaner cuffs, but standing there in Henry's mended coat, with lantern light between them and the ranch breathing softly around her, she understood that staying did not have to mean surrender. Sometimes staying was a choice made by a woman who had finally been asked instead of taken. Yes, she whispered. Henry's eyes searched hers. Yes now, or yes, one day at a time. Bettany stepped closer and took his hand. Both. From inside the house, Caleb shouted loud enough to wake the hens. Mrs. Finch scolded him. The dog barked. Henry laughed, then bent his head to Bettany's gloved hand and kissed it as if it were something precious. They married in spring when the creek ran clear and blue bonnets scattered along the fence line. Bettany carried no bouquet at first, until every woman in Mercy Creek brought one flower. Mrs. Clegg with a white rose, Mrs. Finch with rosemary, the station master's wife with prairie primrose, and even shy little girls with dandelions clutched in warm fists. By the time Bettany reached the church door, her arms were full of color. Caleb walked beside her, because he insisted someone had to make sure Uncle Henry did not faint. Henry stood at the front in a dark coat brushed clean, his left arm no longer bound, his face solemn until he saw her. Then all the guarded years in him seemed to loosen. Reverend Pike spoke of patience, forgiveness, and homes built not from timber alone, but from mercy practiced daily. Henry vowed protection without pride. Bettany vowed truth without fear. Caleb, not asked but determined, vowed to keep frogs out of the kitchen unless medically required. The whole church laughed. Afterward, the town gathered at the Underwood Ranch. There was music from a fiddle, coffee strong enough to float horseshoes, pies lined along the table, and children running between the barn and the porch. Dr. Bell came with a polished wooden sign wrapped in cloth. He gave it to Bettany with both hands. Painted across it were the words, Bettany York Underwood, Nurse. Below, in smaller letters, Mercy Creek Sick Room and Midwife Care. I figured, Dr. Bell said awkwardly. A town with standards ought to have better ones. Bettany accepted the sign. Thank you. Henry hung it the next week on a small room off the kitchen, where sunlight came through the east window. Women came for birthing help. Men came for stitches and pretended they had not been foolish. Children came for cough syrup and peppermint. Bettany treated them all, but she never again allowed any man's title to outweigh her own judgment. Years later, folks in Mercy Creek would still tell the story of the day Bettany York came one day, late with an empty bread tin and a broken bag. Some told it as a tale of a wounded cowboy's rescue. Some told it as the day a town learned shame could be turned around if truth found enough brave hands. Caleb told it best, especially when he grew tall enough to drive the wagon himself. She was not late, he would say. Everyone else was just too early to know what we needed, and on quiet evenings, when the last patient had gone, when the kitchen smelled of bread and the prairie wind moved soft against the windows, Bethany would stand on the porch beside Henry and listen to the distant train whistle carrying over the dark. Henry would take her hand, his thumb brushing the ring he had saved 3 seasons to buy. "You ever regret stepping down from that platform?" he asked once. Bethany leaned into the warmth of his shoulder. In the yard, Caleb's carved wooden horse still sat on the windowsill, weathered now, but treasured. Lantern light glowed behind them. The ranch, once worn and lonely, held laughter in its walls. "No," she said. "That was the first place anyone looked at my lateness and saw a rifle." Henry kissed her temple. Beyond the fence, the prairie stretched wide beneath the stars, no longer a place of exile, but a road that had finally led home.